Hello, welcome to another episode. Nope. An entire new season of Last Call Games. So, if you've been around for a while, you know that we usually try and review lots of games, a lot of old games usually, some new indie titles, old PC games, etc. A lot of that's going to be the same. So you may be asking yourself, well, what's different than why'd you make this season 2 and not just continue going on? Well, first off, I was on hiatus for quite some time because I was moving to here. So that was part 1. Part 2 is trying to do a lot more of a unified theme this year, or this season, I should say. Season could last 2 years, 3 years, however long. Basically, not only am I going to be continuing to review old games, old peripherals, etc., the odd unboxing video, I'm still going to keep trying to do the weekly wrap-up write-up type videos that you saw earlier this week with Toad's Vertical Adventure. And that a lot of that's going to go coincide with the website. So then, what else is new? Good question. First off, there was a small independently made motion picture that has been relatively successful at present. That, of course, is Star Wars. This is not actually this complete saga does not include that movie, but yeah, the Star Wars movies have been relatively popular. And I got me thinking, there's an awful lot of Star Wars video games out there. So, why not rank them all? See which ones are the best and which ones are the worst, and try and put them in a decent enough order. So, I looked into it, and I'm going to try and do that this upcoming year. However long, hopefully I'll be able to finish it by the time Rogue One comes out, or at least episode 8. That just got pushed back for those of you watching in the future. Hopefully it's good. If you're watching this in 2018, tell me if it's good, Do that. So of course that means that not only are we going to be looking at classic games like Star Wars Rogue Squadron or Super Star Wars, but we're also going to look at, less heralded titles like, say, Star Wars Starfighter on the Xbox. Is it good? Not sure yet. I haven't actually bought 2/3 of the games yet. There's 69 Star Wars games as of when I make this right now, using the count that I'm using, which is North American physical releases and not on handhelds only. But that means I'm also going to look at stuff like the Lego Star Wars games. Right now I think there's 4, but one of them is the complete saga, so I'm not sure if that counts or not. At least 3, so I'm going to review that. But I'm also going to include other lesser known things like Making Magic, which is basically an interactive CD for your computer that talks about how they made a lot of the CG and special effects in the Star Wars special editions in 97. So, yeah, it's not really a game, but I had it, and it has an ESRB rating, which some of these don't. I don't think Super Star Wars does, actually. So, why not use that? But, of course, the important thing Last Call Games has been doing, and really what I'd like to think is the niche, is reviews of last games on various home consoles. Don't you worry, we're still doing that. Soon coming right up, Madden NFL 08, the very last Nintendo GameCube game ever released in North America. So, stay tuned. There's a ton of content coming your way. And soon, or within the next week or so, we're going to be launching a Patreon. Basically just try and get a little bit more funding from our fans, and give them a few things like a few question and answer sessions, stuff like that. Haven't really thought up a ton of the reward bonuses, but if you have ideas, definitely shoot them to me, or, you know, whenever that is, because this is the new channel intro. And if you're staying with this video that it's attached to, stay tuned until after the intro starts, and you'll get the video you've been actually wanting. If you haven't, then if you're just watching this on the YouTube channel or on the website, click something, you know, click it. There's videos down there, at least right now they're down there. I don't know what YouTube's going to do when they decide to change everything up again. You know, read some reviews, watch some reviews that read the review, lots of different things that you can do to, you know, find out more about the niche. So we're back, and now you may remember, 16 or so months ago, maybe even 18, I'm not 100% certain offhand, I did a Dreamcast week where I reviewed a different Dreamcast game or Dreamcast related video each day for a week, work week. And one of those that I did was WWF Attitude, made by Acclaim, which shows just how bad it was. They make really terrible games. That's just me. If you're old enough to remember Acclaim, you probably remember their bad years when they made crap. Broken crap. So I reviewed this game, and yeah, it had a huge roster, but it wasn't really that good. And as I said, as I said in my review, this was the last WWF game that Acclaim got to make. Why is that? Well, because they switched over to THQ. THQ was making excellent WCW games, and, you know, they wanted in on that. Now, this was the late 90s, early 2000s. The Dreamcast era was a pretty good time for the WWF. They were so popular, not only could you get like stuff like this awesome The Rock jersey that, you know, is pretty freaking cool, not gonna lie, or you could get the WWF official cookbook. I should make I think I'm gonna, see, I bought this with the intention of getting it for Christmas and making Christmas dinner with just this, but it didn't end up working, but that's stupid and completely beside the point. You can make stuff like Stone Cold's Texas Toast, or tasty Trish kebabs, which sounds disgusting and probably would put me on a list of some sort. And of course, you know, The Rock. Don't forget to make room for The Rock's favorite chocolate chip cookies. But that's all really beside the point. And if I may digress a little bit before I talk about the game we're reviewing today, it's currently January, mid-ish January right now, and in January, the WWE's typical pay-per-view is what they call the Royal Rumble, where usually 30 men compete to be the last one left in the ring, and whoever does that gets big main event push. Usually they get to headline WrestleMania, but this year they're doing something different, which is also completely beside the point. Now, WWF Attitude had a Royal Rumble mode. Actually, apparently it included 20 game modes. But you could only do 4 wrestlers at a time, and yeah, the roster had more than 30, which is pretty cool for that time. But if you could only do 4 wrestlers at a time, there was a really obnoxious loading time when the game loaded in a new wrestler as opposed to whichever one was leaving the ring. It was a little... It was well-intentioned, but not great. So, Sega and THQ and Ukes, the developer, went back to the well with WWF Royal Rumble, which only has 2 game modes, one of which is the Royal Rumble. Now, compared to Attitude, this one has a much smaller roster, a much smaller amount of game modes. But is the game any better? Because frankly put, WWF Attitude was a pretty game. So if Royal Rumble can be better, well, it'll automatically become the best WWF game on the system. Unless you like use an emulator or something to play a Genesis game. But besides that, that's completely beside the point. Let's take a look at some footage and take a look and see how good WWF Royal Rumble really is. WWF Royal Rumble is definitely a shallow video game. And I don't mean that in terms of like superficiality or something like that. It's a game with a distinct lack of content. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, there's 3 video game modes, and one of those is just versus mode, so that doesn't even really count. There's the exhibition mode, which is basically a pretty standard arcade mode, where you wrestle as one person, you have a partner it's not really a tag partner, it just comes in and interferes every now and then. And you go and play 10 matches, and then eventually you try and beat Vince McMahon. You probably won't because he's actually super overpowered. Like, top 10 video game bosses, Vince McMahon is on there, for some reason. And the other mode is the titular Royal Rumble mode. And that's it. WWF Attitude had like 20 modes. This game barely even has 20 wrestlers. There's 19, and then you can unlock Vince and Shane McMahon, which is fan-freaking-tastic. Everybody wants to, you know what, no, you know what, screw Stone Cold, screw The Rock, screw Mankind, no. I want to play as a 50-year-old man. However, despite that lack of content, which is legitimately the worst thing about the game, it's a pretty decent looking game, all things considered. It runs a pretty smooth frame rate, and it says up to 8 or 9 wrestlers on screen with no problem, which is a really good thing for turn of the millennium, actually. So that's definitely a big plus. The audiences actually look a lot better than WWF Attitude's wrestlers do, or audiences do too. I mean, there's still GIFs with like 3 or 4 frames of animation, but they're higher resolution GIFs. So that's a plus. The game does this weird thing where every now and then, especially in the exhibition mode, it'll just like randomly change locations. Like, oh, you started in the ring? Well, now you're in the backstage. Now you're in like the car lot. I have no idea why that's a feature. It's a feature you can turn off, but it's still a feature that for some reason they decided to add in the game. The sound is The music, or the music is okay. The crowd noises and wrestling noises sound decent enough, but there is 0 commentary. None whatsoever. Which is kind of strange for a wrestling game on a disc-based system. Well, with the Genesis, yeah, obviously the games don't have commentary because, cartridges. But on a disc, man, you've got lots more space than that to play with. But okay, fine. The gameplay, which was the worst part about Attitude, and yes, I'm going to continuously compare this to Attitude because they're the only 2 WWF games on the Dreamcast. The gameplay is much, much improved. It still, for some reason, refuses to let you use the analog stick. I don't know why, because it's not a PS1 port, so I don't know why we can't use the analog stick. But you can still use the D-pad, but the hitting people is so much easier. Instead of like pressing like 4 weird things in order to do a grapple. It's just 1 or 2 button presses. Strikes are a lot easier to do. So the gameplay is definitely a lot better. It gets much better later on, but compared to Attitude's really clunky, old-fashioned system, this is a breath of fresh air. So it's definitely got a lot of improvements on the gameplay front, and some presentation improvements. If this had a larger roster, it would be a great game. I mean, it supports up to 4 Dreamcast players simultaneously, which is all their ports, so that's the limit. But is it really would I consider it a great party game? There are better wrestling games to have as a party game, and there are better Dreamcast games to have as a party game, but if you really have to have a Dreamcast wrestling party game, I guess this is kind of it. So that's a pretty decent generalization right there. Let's go back and get some final thoughts and wrap up this little show. So, as I said earlier before I started doing this, of course the Royal Remote mode again has a monstrously bad dearth of both wrestlers to an extent. I mean, there's 20, which isn't that terrible. It says over 20, but I only unlocked up to 19. I'm not sure how you unlock the rest of them. Maybe I'll look that up and try and do it later. But there's 20 or so wrestlers, which is not terrible, I guess. But there's only 2 game modes, which is probably the worst part of the game, honestly. The stuff like moves are a lot easier to pull off than compared to Attitude, and it's probably a more fun game, I would say, but still, it's not that great. Just because of the monstrous lack of content. Yes, it's an arcade port, but you could still put a few more characters in, maybe some console exclusives, but, well, home version exclusives, because this was the only console that came out on. So, with all that in mind, WWF Attitude got a 5 out of 10 from Last Call Games. Royal Rumble is definitely more fun, so I would give it a 6 out of 10. It's better, definitely. But it's not even as good as like SmackDown, which came out earlier this same year on the PS1. So why couldn't the Dreamcast have gotten that game? Oh well. It's, as I said, not the best, but it's definitely playable. I'd probably say than WWF Attitude here. So, that's it for this episode of Last Call Games today. And should have gotten a better case for this. Or just replaced it with a different games lid. Whatever. And remember, as I said, so you may have noticed earlier this week a review went up for a game called Toad's Vertical Adventure. It was only 3 minutes long. As I said earlier in the intro, I'm trying to finish a game every single week because I have like 800, probably even more than that, completely unfinished video games. Actually, it's probably like 1,500 to be honest, but I have a lot of video games. So, definitely, my next video is probably going to be another one of those short type ones, which will accompany a long review on the website. Definitely continue to keep checking that stuff out. But the next long form video we're going to be doing is Madden NFL 08 on the original GameCube. We're going to take a look at the GameCube as a whole, as a system, all that stuff, and compare this one to the Xbox 360 version, which I don't have it all in my hand at the moment. So that's it for this episode. That's completely it. Finished with the postscript and everything. So make sure to tune in next time on Last Call Games. The gameplay basically is each level is effectively 2 separate parts. In part 1, you go down to the bottom, rescuing animals and gathering coins or gold or whatever. And in part 2, after you unlock the chest at the bottom, you have to race up to the top in a timed fashion.